We live.
The dong, dang, the dang, dingy, 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 the boogie, dang, diddy, dang, the dang, the dang.
Hello, Andy Shayla.
Hello, Bombos Charles, the beats for you.
Episode 116, and we have Shane Izykowski.
I like my pronunciation better than yours on this one.
Izykowski.
Izykowski. I think Izykowski. If you run it quicker, it sounds less like you're forcing the Polish word out of your mouth. And we're going to talk to him about his work in the dark arts. And we're going to do that on
a wonderful chaos, Andy.
It is, isn't it, Bambos? Bambos to meet you. Tell me, how was your day?
You fucker. well, Andy Shayla, you know exactly how my day was because we had a pre-talk, but you just think, let's make this an interesting show, get the ratings up, maybe a few tears, you know.
Yes, exactly. If I know it's not interesting, we're not going to discuss it. It's like, so tell me about your day, Bambos.
Well, Andy, you know, it's one of those days where I woke up and I was thinking, like, I haven't had work for 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, this chill feeling creeps up my spine.
Yeah.
And it was especially my morning was allowing that fear to speak to me instead of pushing it away.
Yeah.
And I journaled and just felt the tension and just let it come out through expression. Not that anything made sense in my journal, but it definitely felt like I left the process feeling confused, no clarity, but at peace.
Yeah. It's sort of like
there was nothing to solve.
It isn't interesting is that just getting it out of your system often is enough. I can't recommend just letting it out of your system and not trying to solve it. It's the thoughts that play around in the back of our heads that fuck with us most.
And another really beautiful thing was the breath.
You've been talking about breath a lot lately.
Yeah, just seeing how, I'm actually having a very shallow breath right now. And without forcing anything, just inviting more full breaths, like really filling up and emptying out.
Yeah.
And doing that over and over again and just seeing how the breath also impacts.
Yeah.
And of course, the ice bath.
I ran 3 days in a row. That's all I know. And that hasn't happened in a few years for sure. I know.
I was looking at his belly.
Not a big impact down there, but it doesn't matter.
Actually, you're fast. You've lost weight.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I can feel that there's more space on the couch.
Nice. Shane Izykowski we have on today. We came into contact to Shane, or I came into contact to Shane through Ron Vargas.
Who we've had on the show.
Who we had on the show. He was living without filters.
And without filters, he was really living.
And the idea being that he can be as offensive as he wants to just about as many people as he wants. So, and weirdly, because we prepped it so much, I think that he played it a bit safer and he wasn't as offensive as he'd normally be, which was still nice to be with him and sort of hear.
I think it's because we were also really grounded.
You think? Yeah. Well, I mean, he had been drinking and smoking, and when we saw him, it was 8 a.m, and he was already,
Was he?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Are you kidding me?
I knew he was smoked, but drinking? Okay.
Oh, I don't know. Good point. Well, he had coffee, I guess.
So, Shane, you've actually acquired an art piece from...
I helped the piece we're looking at behind us right now get acquired by a friend. I saw it, and I said, that is one fucked up piece of work. And I sent it to a friend, and I just said, hey, you'll need this thing. And I was surprised because the friend was like, yep, I got it. And then he basically, I don't know, it was an auction. So he put it on the auction and he got it. And Shane took it to the house. He's already installed it at the house. I've seen pictures of it on the wall. And it was really, it was fun because Shane was in San Francisco wanting to offload some of his art before he moved to now where I believe he might be is in Los Angeles. And this friend is in Los Angeles. And I thought, how cool is it to sort of make this work for both of them? And it worked out.
Yeah.
And what I loved about it, and it also was really, is that, especially with the friend that I recommended it to, is Shane's work. You can't look at it without being untouched. Like, you don't look at his work and just have no feeling. You just don't.
I want to brush this guy's teeth.
Like, this guy's, you don't see the best. The best is underneath, which we don't get in this picture. But the best is that this is called fresh candy because he took an old machine, and we'll get into it. But in the machine, there's actual physical objects that are some of the most grotesque things you'd ever do with like a candy, like Twix bar, but with two fingers that are coming out instead of the actual Twix candy, that kind of thing. So I'd love to also discuss how he makes this stuff because I was fascinated when I saw it. I'm also curious, like, does it age? Does it what's the water content? Does it dry up? That kind of stuff. It's just, I have my own curiosities in that way. But what I thought was fantastic is, first of all, like, I know who would buy this because I know a few people that have that mind that would embrace this. But I really want to know who are the people that Shane's also selling to, because anyone who's listening to this on the podcast, you'd also have to go see Shane's work because it is not like subtly grotesque. I would call grotesque. One would call it dark. But when like there's a picture, a painting of like an older man eating an arm, and like that picture just like throws me back like, oh my God, like what's going on here? And it takes me to a lot of places which are, wow, this is where we are in society at the moment. So his work touches me not only on this is grotesque, but it's a reflection of where I believe we are sometimes as a society, but we're afraid to see it that way. And that's why Fresh Candy was which is a piece I'm looking at, or it's behind us now, was so impactful for me because it's like we have made a life out of this grotesqueness, but we place it in selfies and in filters. So it looks much cleaner than it really is. But underneath it all, it is a bit grotesque. And that's why I really found his work so appealing.
I'm really curious to what is inspiration, where it's sourced.
Yes.
Should we bring him on?
Yeah, of course we bring him on.
Are you ready?
Set, go.
Hey,
Hello.
How you guys doing?
Good.
Hey, has anything that we've shared been out of line or not resonating with you?
Yeah.
Out of line is definitely someplace I like to be anyway. So no, it's all pretty accurate what you're saying. Well, first I want to say Bambos.
Yes.
Is that your name? You got to watch the shallow breath. You might have the coronavirus nowadays. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
You're
Good
talking
point.
before about so
Shallow breath.
yeah. And also you were actually both wrong. You were both wrong with pronunciation. You were very close.
Shit.
But my last name is actually pronounced Izykowski.
No.
Yeah.
Izykowski. Izykowski.
Yeah.
And the best thing is like you are not any Izykowski. That's the best thing. You're like a Chew or I don't know what the words would be. So how do you become an Izykowski?
So my birth name was Ojin Kwan.
Okay.
I was born in South Korea, and I was adopted when I was 2.
Wow.
So I lived in Jersey when I was adopted. Yeah. So that's how I was adopted by Karen and Bob Izykowski, and yeah. So I grew up mostly in Jersey and Pennsylvania.
And how just out of curiosity, how much do you go back or have any interest or any desire to connect with anything going on in South Korea?
Pretty much my entire life, I've steered so clear of wanting to know anything about anything Asian. I didn't want to be the Asian kid that was into Asian stuff. You know, I was
Nice.
really like against it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So.
And did you have to deal with that bullshit as you were being like raised growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I was my parents did like a good job of trying to keep that interest in me. Like, I mean, I went to like Korean culture camp when I was little, but again, I had like no interest, so I'm like very Americanized.
Yeah.
So you were like there thinking, what the hell am I doing
Exactly.
here?
They're feeling guilty for you. Like, we have to give him this culture. We have to let him know where his roots were. When was the time, like, when was the first time you realized that you looked different than your parents?
Oh, honestly, I have no idea. Because it was always like, it wasn't necessarily my parents letting me and my sister, who was also adopted. I'm sorry, I live right by Burbank Airport, so you're going to be hearing planes every once in a while. But it wasn't necessarily my parents who were the ones who made that very apparent to us. It was more like other people. So we would be out places and they would say things to my mom like, are you going to raise them to be your own or something, things like that along those lines. And my mom was always like, they are my own, So, yeah.
Yeah. We had a guest on that basically was raising the kids in the family. His wife is the one who's the breadwinner. So like when he went out and goes out, basically everyone's like, oh, so you're giving your wife a day off. That kind of totally not considering that the reality might be different. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So transitioning, I saw your work and I just thought, this is really fucked up. And when I was, and it's not often that I'll stop and send work to friends and say, hey, dude, this is beyond you. And so when I was looking at your work, like, I think I mentioned, when we started that I had two feelings, like, this is grotesque and it's a metaphor for everything I sort of feel deep in my soul, but I'm afraid to speak out. Like the Maneatman world and the Fresh Candy, the art piece, which is just way beyond. And so I guess what my thought was, like, where did you first think, oh, this is the kind of art I'm attracted to? Like, when did that begin for you?
Oh man. I'm like a monster kid. Like I was always into horror. I was always into monster movies and things like that. So much like a lot of the dark artists that I'm in contact with nowadays, we've just always been into it, and there's almost no explanation to that aside from just pure fascination, so yeah, I mean, it's always kind of been that way. And I was really enamored with special effects and movie magic and things like that when I was younger. So being really into that and doing Halloween costumes and things like that from a very early age always kind of kept me in that realm, So I actually, with my family, when we were younger, we used to do haunted houses as like a family. We would help at this like local haunted house. And even in like early grade school, I actually would go on like field trips to my house from my school because of how my parents decorated for Halloween. So like it's kind of just been that way. Like we've always been like a Halloween family since very early. So yeah.
Like, how old were when you say early age? What are we looking at? 8 years old?
Oh my gosh, let's see. Probably even before then. But I think around like 7, 8 was when I started actually seeing like horror movies, and probably way too early to see some of the movies that I saw. But I think,
I have to tell you, I watch a horror movie trailer, I can't sleep.
Yeah, what's the first horror movie that you ever saw where you basically it impacted you so much you like were fearful? I know it, like I know where I was, I know every detail about it.
Yeah, so the first one, I feel like I always go back to, I'm not sure if it's the first one I ever saw, but the Wolfman, the original Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr. That was probably one of the earliest ones, and it wasn't even necessarily that it was scary. It wasn't necessarily that it freaked me out, but I just loved the story, and that for me has always kind of like has been the attractive part for me. You know, I was always into the makeup and everything, and the monsters themselves, but it had to have a good story. And that movie, just even as like a young child, like kind of hit me in this certain way, you know. And I loved it. I loved like old Universal films when I was younger. Still do.
But when you were at such a young age, and I can imagine at school you have art class, were you creating pieces which maybe the teachers found disturbing?
Yeah, teachers like, we got to send him to a psychiatrist. Something's wrong with Shane.
Well, let me preface this by saying first off that I was going to Catholic schools up until 8th grade.
I was going to say something to you before. When you said you were adopted by parents from New Jersey, I wanted to say, I must admit I've got a massive prejudice. And the prejudice is that I'm assuming that they're the religious parents that like to do good works in the world, like they're the most loving people, but then they make sure that their kids go to the Catholic school because that's part of their thing. So that was, just wanted to like own that before you shared.
Yeah. So I have a theory. I mean, I feel like inadvertently in the Catholic religion, they're showing you signs, you know, crucifixion and devils and demons and fallen angels and plagues and things like that from a very early age, and just giving you this like fear. And I feel like that, you know, I don't put a lot of religion in my artwork up until this point, but it definitely impacted me from a very early age, you know. So I feel like that, combined with the love for horror movies and the love for Halloween and stuff, has kind of like somehow seeped into my artwork nowadays, for sure.
When you say seeped in, you wouldn't say that so you say you've moved to this point. Where were you before you got here?
Well,
would you have painted like beautiful flowers at some point in your life, or was it always something a little bit edgy?
I paint flowers nowadays in some of the work, but I mean, edgy is such a, I would probably never describe my work as edgy, you know. To me,
you've cut a fucking a man's arm is cut off and another man is eating it. What is that? How would you phrase that?
Good question. Horrific.
Okay. Horrific.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. But yeah, no, when I started doing artwork in about like 6th, 7th grade, I was really into comic books at the time. So I started drawing at that time, and I was always into comic books that were more on, you know, the horror side. And so that's like when I first started drawing, that's the kind of artwork that I was doing. So it's always been kind of that way, but it's only like within the past few years that I've really kind of honed in on what kind of artwork really actually speaks to me. You know, when you're young and you're starting out, you kind of just do what you see and what you like, and from there you kind of start developing your own style and everything.
Like if I'm looking at the piece behind us, where were you in your life at that point? And like, do you have to, like, in my brain, are you experiencing a dark emotion, or are you completely at peace and you're like, wow, I don't even know what's going to come out?
Yeah, this piece for me was like pure fun. Like, there's pretty much nothing dark about it, which is probably weird to say, but it's all like the fun parts of like Halloween and things like that, you know. So Well, do you want me to tell you the story of the entire piece and how I came up
Hell
with it and
yeah.
everything? Okay. Well, first of all, Andy, thank you so much for helping me sell the piece.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. And so that piece, I knew that it was for a specific show, and I knew that I wanted to make something really awesome, you know. So I wanted to make something kind of different for me, and I had gone to an online auction and I found this vending machine, you know, as an antique, and I ended up buying it for, I won the bid. It was like $40 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I drove 2 hours with a friend of mine and went and picked it up, and I got this piece, and it had been sitting in my studio for a few months before I even really started on it. And for a piece like that, I kind of just need to stare at it for a while to figure out what to do with it, because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with it. And as I was looking at it in my studio, I started to like kind of develop this idea of what I wanted to do. And that's, I believe I had the idea for the scary candy, the sculptural elements first before I came up with the imagery on the top. So the painting that you see, it's a friend of mine who lives in LA. He's an actor. He was actually in the most recent Puppet Master film. His name is Noel Jason Scott. And when I was trying to formulate this character, the idea for it just kind of came out of that idea of fresh candy. The entire front of the piece, it's literally the front door of the vending machine. So I took it off of the rest of the vending machine and I made it so it's wall mountable.
Mm-hmm.
So it's literally just the front. And luckily, you know, there's electric on the inside and the light was still working. So I developed this idea for this character, and I just thought that my friend Noel would be perfect for it. Just creepy dude. And I knew that from being an actor, he can contort his face and make these certain expressions. And so he's already like a horror actor. So I knew he'd be perfect for it. And at the time, I didn't I couldn't come down to LA to shoot him. You know, typically I photograph my own reference for all my pieces. And so he had a friend of his named Bob. Bob Orso is a photographer, and he said, no problem, we can shoot it ourselves, just let us know exactly what to do. So I gave them full instructions on how I wanted the lighting. I wanted it to be kind of like that classic horror movie lighting from underneath, and to just give him that menacing look. And they just like knocked it out of the park with the reference. So yeah.
Can I
see
the actual picture at some point? I'd love to see that separately, just because.
Yes.
If it's possible. Just because I can't imagine his face looking anything like this.
Well,
I'm sure you distorted a little bit.
I mean, of course, his teeth had to be distorted completely, obviously.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And actually, so I do like a full Photoshop mock-up beforehand before I actually paint the pieces. So I actually took his mouth and his mustache and I elongated them and made them much larger. So yeah, so that's definitely exaggerated.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then the actual sculptural elements, I basically just picked 10 candies that we're like familiar with, and they're sculpted out of something called Magic Sculpt, which is it's like an epoxy clay, and it's like a part A and a part B mixture. You mix them together and it dries in a day completely. And you could put the stuff, you could create a statue to put outdoors and it's like that durable. So this thing is like, it's rock hard when it actually sets and everything. So each one of those individual pieces, again, you can't see them here, but I had severed finger Twix, I had tongue taffy, pimple candy dots, an eyeball lollipop,
Of course you did.
maggoty things. Yeah, so it was just like I basically just picked these different candy bars and candies to include, and the lighting from the original piece lit those pieces up. And yeah, and it was just like while I was creating the whole thing, you know, I was documenting it. I have a Patreon, so I threw stuff on my Patreon for people to see, like the behind the scenes of me sculpting everything.
Wow.
And
Did you
yeah,
know it was magic when you were creating it? Did you know that this is like, oh, this is shit, this is wild? Did you know that, or were you kind of?
Yeah. I mean, I had a feeling when I was making this piece that it would be like well received by people, you know, and you don't always know when you're creating artwork how people are going to take it. But I knew, again, like this piece, like it looks horrific, but it was fun. It was fun to make. And then just seeing it, I mean, there was like a child at the show who the piece was hung where it was basically right in his eye line, like all the sculpted candy pieces. So like it's the perfect height for like a kid to be just like wowed, you know. So me as a child would have loved to see something like that, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That is wild. I mean, I've got so many things that are going on in my head as you're talking. I've got 20 questions that probably aren't interesting enough to ask online, but I want to know if like epoxy, I can see like 20 things I want to do with that epoxy already. So I'm going to ask you offline.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem.
I had questions. I do know I wanted to at least go back. The Exorcist had a horrible influence on my ability to sleep, and Omen scared the shit out of me with every bird that I saw, like on a wire. So I always had to like ride my bike a lot faster because I was always afraid that the birds were following me.
I remember Twilight Zone.
Really?
Friday 13th, The Boogeyman, Psycho, like the first one.
Yeah, Twilight Zone was a huge influence on me as well.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And that, again, story. I mean, for me, I'm so into storylines, you know, telling a story. And if you look at my artwork, I'm always trying to tell a story. And even with this, where it's literally just a portrait, you know, it's, for me, it's all like the association between the actual frame itself, the candy, and the character, you know. So I wanted to create, like, if you were given these creepy candies, I want to create the character that would be giving you those.
Exactly.
Like this,
that's what it felt like.
This piece could easily be in one of the Twilight episodes.
Oh, without a doubt.
Like this could be the theme thing, you know.
But the thing is that the story, it's amazing, and I find this beautiful in art, is you create it, but you don't decide how other people interpret and internalize it. So I see like capitalism, like this for me, like I see like the worst parts of capitalism in this, in your picture. And you'd say, Andy, come on, you're stretching it. This is just a nice horror thing.
No, you know what? That's not too far off. You know, I don't typically like aim to talk about things like capitalism, but that other piece that you brought up during the intro with the arm, people have told me that they think about capitalism with that piece as well.
Sure.
So yeah,
where they call it like a dog eat dog world, and you know, this is a man eat man world. Yeah. You know, the piece that, you know, we're not looking at the pieces. The people on the podcast wouldn't be able to see it either. Like some of the pieces that I saw that I couldn't quite make sense out of was like you had a really beautiful woman holding two keys in her hand, and it had all this symbolism. But when you look at it, you really don't know what it is. But you kind of feel like, are you going to take the red pill or the blue pill? You know, that was my feeling when I saw that.
Yeah, that's right. So that piece was for a solo show I did last year. The show was called Midnight Moon in the Garden of Goodbye, and that entire show was about regret. And so what I did with that concept was I created a place that people could go between death and the afterlife to let go of their regret. And so I had an entire I wrote this poem that told that story of what it was, and I had these three characters within this garden. And so that character that you're talking about is my gatekeeper character, and it's basically like she's a blindfolded character, and it's the idea of you have the choice. You know, you have the choice to enter this garden, to let go of your regret with the hope that you're finally at peace. So the second part of that story is the widow, and there's these characters within the garden letting go of their regret, and they're like pained while they're doing it, and their hands are bound. And they're actually declaring their regrets on these typewriters, so it's like they're typing them out. And then the third part of it is a gardener character, and it's after these people have let go of their regret, they're buried within the garden. So there's these hands that are unbound, sticking up out of the soil, and he's like planting them in the garden to be at peace.
I noticed that one. That one freaked me out.
It's a bit of a shame that we can't look at it as we're talking.
But Shane Izykowski will be able, anyone who wants to can Google it and see it as well afterwards.
So Shane, there's two polarities which are vibrating in me right now, and that is the two polarities of the dark masculine, the conscious one that's fully embraced, and then you've got also the unconscious dark masculine that can be quite harmful. And how do these polarities play out in you? Because actually, when I'm experiencing you, I see you as a very sweet person, actually, that just likes having fun.
Yeah. That's a good question. You know, most of the men that I portray in my paintings are like monsters or horrific in some way. And then most of the women that I portray are empowered and powerful. And so throughout my life, I've had really important women. Like my mom is such a huge influence on me, and all of my best friends and everything have always been women. So a lot of my artwork centers around a lot of things that women have to go through silently, you know. And so it's, for me, as far as the masculine side of things, I've always kind of struggled with being masculine, you know. So I tried to be into sports just because my friends were and things like that, but I'm not that dude.
It's just not working out.
What's that?
It's just not working out.
No, it's not. And for so long, like as a kid, I was trying to be that way, but I'm just not, you know. So so for me, like when I'm portraying men as these grotesque, horrific characters, I think it's just a way for me to like show the world through maybe the lens of like the feminine side and some of these things that women actually have to deal with.
Wow.
Yeah. You guys am I frozen on the video? Because
no,
everything's frozen for me on this side.
No, you're totally moving around. You're perfect.
As long as you guys can still hear me. So.
But whenever anyone asks me that, I like to break out in song and sing "Let It Go." So I'm holding back.
Would you portray Andy as one of these characters? Can you see that part of Andy?
I don't know Andy well enough to know if he could pull it off, but I feel like I'm good at instructing people, so I feel like anybody could do it. But nowadays my process is a little different, and it's a little more involved with the people that I'm actually painting. And it's sort of developed even from this piece, which I did, you know, I completed this piece, I think in January. Even since then, I have I've like honed in on my process a lot more, and I spend a lot more time discussing the person that I'm actually painting. And through that process, I've kind of like figured out a way to include them on this like higher level. So it's not just a picture of a person. It's like the piece generally, even if it's like confined within a certain world, or like I'm painting a vampire, or I'm painting a zombie or something like that, I'm still having some deeper, meaningful discussion with the person to find out kind of what they can bring, like what elements they can bring to the piece that are more personal. And so it's been a really interesting way to change up the way that I was doing it, because originally I was doing it where I would come up with the concept, talk to the person, find a person that would fit for it, photograph them, and then I would do the piece. And that entire process felt really like transactional to me. And so I kind of wasn't enjoying it. And once I started changing it where I started having these long, meaningful discussions with people, and then fitting their personality and who they are into the piece within, say, like a vampire world or something like that, it worked a lot better, where the final result meant more to the person, you know? And ultimately, like, if somebody's going to be in a painting of mine, I want it to mean something. I want it to be meaningful to them and a good experience. So so I've just been trying to figure that out, and it's been really interesting, getting to know the people that I'm painting, because I have, say, a relationship with them, my own separate relationship, and then we photograph it, you know, come up with the concepts, photograph it, and then my relationship to the character or to my painting is a separate thing than my relationship to the person. Especially because I'm sitting there painting it, you know, and I'm there for, you know, 20, 30, 40 hours and just sitting there and painting it. So it's been a really interesting process, like getting to know how to make it more meaningful to the person and how to make it more meaningful to myself. And what's funny about that entire process is I end up feeling like the least important part of the entire process, where the final painting ends up being just the proof that the connection and the idea happened, you know, and the actual creation of it, of the concept and everything, ends up being way more meaningful than the final painting itself.
Yeah.
You know, that's just proof that it even happened.
You mean the journey, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny, because the friend who purchased this painting that we're sitting in front of now, he always says that the artwork is kind of the detritus of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
yeah. And that makes sense.
Yeah. I felt the same, by the way, with the book. You know, like everyone was like, I just came out with a book recently that did well. And when it was done, I'm like, okay, it's done. Like, it was like the doing it was its own process. It was its own connecting. It's hearing the story, seeing where it feels, reaching out to people and saying, hey, this is what it wrote, not reaching out to others and saying, hey, no reason to discuss because we're going to change all the details anyways. So there's sort of this sort of feeling of like creation, but then when it's done, it's like, okay, it's not done, you know, and I don't get to decide what you take away from it or not. That's for the audience now from that moment forward.
Yeah, and I feel like the process isn't complete until I present it to the public, you know, and I actually end up I learn things from others' reactions and how they interpret it, because when I'm actually doing it, I have the concept, I create it, and then I put it out to the world, and people have their own associations with different symbolism and things. So people take things in different ways. So So you're right. It's like I have absolutely no control over that part of it, which is kind of awesome, you know.
Shane, have you made any self-portraits?
I have, yeah. So throughout my life, I think every artist has done it in some way. But within the past few years, I did a piece called Whisper Down the Alley. And are you guys familiar with the telephone game?
You mean when you whispered someone's ear and the next person?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that idea, I grew up with that game being called Whisper Down the Alley. So I had that kind of in mind, and that entire game just symbolizes gossip and how it just gets convoluted by the time it goes around. So
yeah.
at the time, gossip, and I was living in a small town, it like really affected me, and so I felt like I kind of needed to show that, and so the image is a girl whispering in my ear, and then I'm like possessed, or I have this look on my face of like terror or something. So on the left side of me is like a very bright alley, and then the right side of me is like the darker parts of the alley. So it kind of symbolizes being torn and pulled in both directions, where I want to get away from the gossip, but I kind of can't help myself, being pulled to like the dark side. And then recently I just did, it's not exactly a self-portrait, but I'm in it. It's a piece called I Left My Heart in San Francisco. And so when I left San Francisco, I kind of wanted to do like a farewell piece to it. And I had actually been thinking about this concept for years. And then when I finally decided I was leaving San Francisco, I finally figured out how to do the piece, and the missing component of it was me, which is totally weird, because I don't really, it's not like I sit there thinking about painting myself, but again, this is like, it was a fun piece for me because it's a zombie piece where the zombie is literally like eating my heart, and then my corpse is like laying on this wall with the Golden Gate Bridge and the San Francisco skyline behind it. And I wanted to do a piece that felt very much like an old San Francisco postcard. And, when you look at it, it's like horrific, a bloody zombie, rotting zombie and everything. But it's fun, it's like kind of a fun piece. But for me personally, my experience in San Francisco, I lived there for 5.5 years, and I like really got beaten down a lot there.
Yeah.
Because it's so difficult to maintain a living as an artist in that city, and so it kind of like, when I look at that piece, it's a little like some of those feelings of some of the despair and some of the things that I went through in that city come up, so so it is actually, again, being a zombie piece and taking all the things in my experience with San Francisco, they're in that piece for me. So most people just see like a fun zombie piece, but for me, it is a little deeper and more meaningful for me.
And you now moved to Los Angeles. So
correct.
In the vision is that Los Angeles will have more opportunities, I'm assuming, or probably already has.
Do you know something he doesn't know?
Well, I mean, he already sold one piece there, so that I know at least.
I've sold multiple pieces here. So I've been basically, like, this plan of moving down here has been in the works for a few years. And I started showing my artwork down here and commuting from San Francisco to come down here for horror conventions. And there's some specific galleries here that show this kind of artwork. So I've been concentrating on the audience here for a while, and I realized at a certain point that the audience here reacts to it in a different way. And I feel like because, you know, the entertainment industry is down here and they understand theatrics and they understand the things that would go behind some of my artwork. In San Francisco, unfortunately, I feel like everyone wants to see happy artwork all the time, you know, and that's just kind of the vibe there. So I would show it there and I would get a different kind of reaction, and a lot of good reactions, but it would be taken in a different way. And I always felt like I stuck out, maybe not in the best way there, you know, but in LA,
Twisted Asian guy.
Here.
Yeah, the Twisted Asian guy. Yeah. You were just the Twisted Asian guy.
Yeah.
Shane, are there any pieces that you've made in your life that you're like, wow, even for me, this is so fucked up if I put it out there, like, and you keep it?
One step too far.
No. So I have what I would define as like a finishing complex. Because when I was younger, there was a period of time where I didn't complete anything. And it created like this thing in me where I feel like everything that I do, I have to make the best use of my time, and I don't want to spend time on anything that isn't worth it for me. So yeah, every single piece that I come up with, all the concepts and everything, I've thought about obsessively, and I just want to release it then. So like, so no, I mean, I basically everything that I conceptualize, I put out into the world. And again, like that isn't, it's not for me to decide how fucked up it is or how people perceive it.
Yeah.
You know?
How do you perceive your art? Like, I mean, you heard Andy earlier, it's grotesque. It's like, like, but I have the idea that you have a completely like other polarity to that when you look at your own pieces.
Yeah, I don't know. Like the pieces that people think are grotesque, again, it's like, it's kind of more fun for me. It comes from that like love of horror movies and special effects makeup and everything. So for me, it's just like my childhood coming through, you know? So other people look at it as like a guy eating a severed arm, you know? For me, I'm like,
they take it literally.
Like, it's fun. Yeah, it's more fun for me. So yeah, I don't know. I kind of like, I just sort of let it happen. Like it's not as scary and grotesque as other people perceive it to me.
So if you're at home and you've got all your art pieces around the living room and it's like a stormy night, you're looking at it, it's like, oh yeah, this is like, gives me a nice warm feeling.
Yeah.
You're not like getting freaked out.
No, and well, two things. The people in my paintings are like friends of mine, you know, so they kind of tell the story of my life and the people that are in my life at that time. So for me, it's kind of like comforting. And the second part of that, though, like I was trying to explain before about my relationship with the person and then my relationship with the painting. So a weird thing that happens sometimes is if I'm painting a picture of a person that's looking directly at the viewer, not actually, sometimes when I'm painting animals, this happens as well. If they're looking right at the viewer, while I'm painting it, whenever I paint the eyes and I kind of like the point where I bring them to life, I get freaked out because they're like looking at me. So it's like, it's a weird thing because I'm in my studio by myself. I'm like listening to music or something, and then all of a sudden they're staring at me, and then I have this weird feeling about another person like in the room looking at me, which is totally weird, but it's something that's happened to me before.
Well, I mean, it's kind of cool because at some point it would be like, as soon as the painting comes alive, that is sort of part of the process. Like if you didn't feel like those eyes were staring at you, then the painting probably isn't that good to begin with.
Yeah,
it's totally not there yet. So that's your reference point.
I would love to talk about Whisper Down the Alley once as a side, just a total side story. I live on the shopping street right now in the middle of Amsterdam. And across the road from me, there's a Thai restaurant. And in the Thai restaurant, there's a woman. I used to run a Thai restaurant in another part of the city some years ago. And I've said hi to her once. So all of a sudden, from like the Whisper Down the Alley, I've now heard that I'm having sex with the woman who runs the restaurant across the street, who I've said hello to once.
Really?
Yes. So
slow down. Who
exactly? Bob was like, I don't know this story yet. Yes.
Who's been saying that?
So this is the Whisper Down the Alley. I have no idea who's saying, but it's gone through this Thai community of Amsterdam, so that it's finally reached the woman who I used to work with, who's my basically the woman whose husband was my partner, and he died. So now she's around, but he's not. Like if he was around, he would have quashed that stuff really fast. But now, so it goes back all the way to her. I don't know the woman, but now I've been told, Andy, just want to check in. Did you have sex with this woman? Like the woman that I've said hello to once. And I'm just like, so I'm kind of half like, what the fuck? And now half like, this is the best. And then like when I'm walking home, I like say, hey babe, there's that woman I had sex with. Like, so when I'm with my wife and I see her now. And it was all really funny until we were at a table at that restaurant. And I told the table, hey guy, by the way, just that everyone knows, that's the woman I had sex with. Just, and she's like, Andy, no, inappropriate. You can't say that. But I mean,
you can talk about
I find it amazing. Yeah, I find it amazing with small communities, how the truth can be totally blown out of proportion. You know, and I experienced that in Pennsylvania, in the small town that I was in. You know, Main Street was like 4 blocks long, and that was basically the town. You know, that's the part of the town that everybody would come to. We had a Starbucks there. There was a theater there, and there was a gallery that I was running at the time. And yeah, those 4 blocks were like everything. And my entire universe at the time centered around that. So just being somebody in that town, you know, people talk and I talked, and it gets real.
Was there a lot of diversity there, or were you like the only Asian?
Oh my gosh. No, there's hardly any diversity. And I've always, you know, in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, me and my sister were always like one of like 4 Asian people ever, you know? So yeah, diversity wasn't something that I really experienced until I moved to San Francisco.
Yeah. I lived in Japan for a few years, and I was the only white person in the village. So it wasn't like stigmatized, but there were people that certainly looked down on me. And it was really weird to be on the other side of the like, I went out to buy food at the supermarket, and my landlord called me up an hour later, and she described what I purchased. So she knew what I bought, because somebody else phoned her and said, Andy bought all these things. And then she listed the ingredients and stuff, which kind of freaked me out. Like that level of intrusion in your life was pretty wild. Yeah.
I'm blown away. Yeah.
You're still blown away by the woman across the street.
Well, Bulalang says,
well, Bolalang, yeah.
It must have started with her saying to someone, Andy was here.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, Andy dropped by. Oh, Andy, you had sex with him?
Andy waved, and the wave got translated into sex. It's very easy. Wave.
Yeah.
Sex.
And Bolalang is one of our favorite listeners. He's in South Africa, and he says cool. You have an interesting mind. He's with us daily.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes. Bulalang, we need to do something with that profile picture.
Yeah, Bolalang. Bambos is going to help you with your profile picture.
Yes.
We see him every day, so we got to kind of, we're putting him on the show. We got to have him look right. On a separate note, a more intense one. First of all, let me publicly apologize for my message to you, because your dad was in hospice, and I sent you one of the worst messages that anyone could send anyone.
What did
Like,
you say?
I was just so like, all I wanted to do was share a little compassion with Shane. I hear his dad was in hospice, and I thought, oh, let's just reach out and let him know I'm thinking about him, you know? And so I now know this. So I write him in the text, listen, Shane, I heard about your dad. I'm really sorry. So, but he's now sitting on a razor's edge because he's like, when is my dad going to die? And has Andy heard about it before I did? So he's now triggered. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, like what a horrible, you know, unintentional mishap.
So Shane received the message and thought that you knew something.
He doesn't know. Of course, when you're that peak experience, you don't know what's going on. So yeah, my apologies for fucking that one up. Yeah.
No, that's okay. Yeah, at the time, I was going through a lot, and not only was, you know, I'm on the West Coast, my parents are on the East Coast. And so I was in communication with them, and, you know, every day was kind of just like, you know, essentially dad's getting worse. And so when you had sent me that message, I was like, did you hear something that, like, who are you talking to? I have no idea. So I'm like, did you hear something that I haven't heard? Did I just find out from you that my dad died? So like, so I had no idea. And I also was like packing up my entire life in San Francisco. I was saying goodbye to friends. My emotional level was so high at the time that just that message was like enough where, you know, in a panic, I called my mom to find out what was going on. She was like, yeah, nothing's really changed. Like, he's doing okay, but he, you know, obviously he's in hospice care. So, so no big deal. Thank you for apologizing. And
it was the road to hell is paved with good intentions. How has it been for you? Because he only recently passed away. So how has that process? How has it been for you to sort of go through that?
Really intense. I try to get home to see my parents as often as possible, but it's difficult. It's difficult as a full-time artist. You know, just even making enough money to eat on a daily basis. So to visit home is always difficult for me. So I had actually wanted to get home in January, and I had gotten really sick, and I actually think I had coronavirus back in January because of how sick I was. So I canceled my trip, so I wasn't able to go see them. And then, you know, the pandemic happened, so I couldn't see them for a long time. And then he ended up getting sicker, and so when he finally was admitted into home hospice care, I was just like, do I need to come home right this second? What's the deal? And so essentially it was right at the tail end of me moving from San Francisco. So it was tough. It was like a rough couple of weeks where I had to pack up all of my stuff. I wasn't sure if he was going to die like any day. And I just like hoped that I could get through the entire move to LA, and then go and visit them. So that's essentially what ended up happening. Was I did the entire move. I got to LA, delivered and installed that piece, and then like 2 days later, I flew to Pennsylvania, and I was there for about like 2.5 weeks. And, you know, by the time I got there, he was responsive, but he couldn't speak. And it was also really difficult to see him in that condition, because by that point he was extremely skinny, and I hadn't really, you know, I saw him on video chat, but until you're in front of somebody nearing the end of their life, you don't really know. And so it was tough. It was really, really difficult, but I was just trying to be there for my family and everything. And my sister and I and my mom were there in the room, you know, comforting him as he was passing. And it was the first time I really experienced that. And what was interesting for me was, you know, I deal a lot with death in my artwork. So to experience it in person and just feel all of that energy and everything was a different experience for me. And I don't know yet how that's going to be brought out like in my artwork, but I'm definitely going to have to figure out how to show that in the artwork, or how to work through some of those emotions through the artwork at some point.
Yeah, I find that creative expression is often like where the processing. I after doing this tour and then writing the book, I found that writing the book was the outlet I needed to work through the things that came up throughout the whole trip. And it wasn't an easy or beautiful process. It was very much just finding and feeling and kind of not quite knowing where to put an emotion, but continuing anyways, because you figured I'll have to figure it out as I continue.
Yeah. And, you know, as men, you know, from a very early age, so many men are taught not to express their emotions, not to cry, you know, to suppress all those things. And for me, like, I've always been an emotional person and sensitive and everything. And so much so that people in a very derogatory way have expressed to me, Shane, you're so sensitive, you know, and I've just always been that way. So like, I've never really been my only fear surrounding that is from like ridicule from other people of being too sensitive. And I mean, I've heard this from women as well, you know, and I feel like I'm on this journey, you know, now in my late 30s, of like unpacking that and feeling all of those emotions and doing a lot of self-work to try to figure that out. And some of that is through my artwork, and some of it is also just through the journey of life, you know, just trying to figure out why I feel a certain way. You know, everybody goes through some sort of trauma or something, typically like early in life, and I'm still trying to like kind of figure all of that out as well. And a lot of it is worked out through my artwork.
Yeah, beautiful. We've got the And It's Fucking Great group in case you want to let out any of your thoughts in that group. Basically, you say the thing that's hardest to make peace with, and it's fucking great. So I'm sensitive, I'm incapable, and I can't accept it in myself, and it's fucking great.
Okay.
Quite a beautiful reservoir of shared content with people just letting themselves be free of it. Shane, thank you. We're reaching the top of our hour. It's really great to be with you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you guys.
Yeah, I really wish you luck in your new journey in LA. And I assume that I always, when we started the show, I called them sick minds. And you said, Andy, I don't want you to say sick minds because we aren't sick minds. There's enough people that appreciate gruesome art. Which I didn't even find gruesome, actually, on some level. It's jarring. That's what I experienced. I was jarred by your work. So congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, man. And then, look forward to the new pieces.
Yeah.
All the best.
From Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Hey, man. That was fun.
I really liked him.
Yeah, he's a sweet man, isn't he? Yeah, it's interesting because sometimes we, especially now in some of these later shows, we don't know the people as much as some of the other shows when, you know, I went through all my high school friends. But now it's almost like we get to kind of peek in. It's a bit of a round robin. We really don't know who we're going to be meeting until we get on air.
Yeah.
And it was really sweet just to see it. What I found fascinating was that there's so much play involved in his art that I had all of these feelings that came up, but from his side, he really is expressing these imagery that he's attracted, he finds interesting, as opposed to making a statement of some sort.
There's a lot of love and fun and lightness in the creative process.
Exactly. You're almost like you're not allowed to enjoy something that's like that. It can't be that fun.
So it's like, ha 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 ha. This is like, I can imagine, like, if his friend sees the pictures, like, oh man, I look fucking awesome. This is the shit.
What I love though is that I'm now, it's sort of weird. I need to find the guy's name is Noel. I don't know what his full name is, but now when I go to visit my friend's house and I walk by this piece, the fresh candy piece, I'm always going to be looking and like thinking, wow, there's a guy, Noel, who this is painted after. I thought this face was made up. Yeah. Couldn't be a real face. There's no way. That was my thought beforehand.
Yeah, I also want to acknowledge that Shane did lose his father, and I felt really grateful that he having that experience is still being on the show.
Yeah.
And
it's intense to go through that. We know.
Yeah.
We've got a few more shows this week.
No, we don't.
Bob Deutsch. Tomorrow is Wednesday. It's a Wednesday. Yeah, it's Wednesday tomorrow. Bob
Some great minds.
Yeah, he interviews famous people and writes books. So we're going to talk to him about Bruce Springsteen, about David Bowie, about a few other people that he's got a list of people.
Did he talk to you?
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to talk to Marcel Heinen, who's in Hong Kong. We have two artists this week.
Yeah.
Hong Kong-based artists.
What is this? Like last week, it was all Holocaust.
It was all Holocaust.
And
no, it's funny how that works out. Unplanned. And then on Friday, we have Changing the World with Dylan.
13-year-old
who's done a documentary that's won some awards. And he's basically making awareness that we're fucking up all the ocean. So his generation basically won't have anything. So
he's probably going to blow our minds.
Yeah. And we won't cuss on that one, by the way, just to make sure. I'm speaking to myself, not you. Thank you for being with us.
And it's fucking great.
We'll see you next time.
Oh, guys,
yes.
one little announcement.
Yes.
In 21 minutes, Andy is hosting. You want to say?
Is it 21? No. It starts at 7 o'clock.
Oh, sorry. So that's
51 minutes.
51 minutes.
In 51 minutes, I'll be doing the
Wounded Healer.
The Wounded Healer, getting in contact with your triggers. It's basically a workshop. And
become your own healer.
We did it before. It basically uses the and it's fucking great practice, and we just do it, and it's kind of fun, and you just an opportunity to connect with it, right? Yeah. If you read the book, it's really great because then you get to see the practice behind it.
It's going to be on a Zoom call, and we're expecting it's going to be quite busy, but you do get into pairs and you do the work between the two of you, and it's pretty. I've had people coming back to me saying it was really impactful.
Yeah, I had people as well. And if you can't do it now, there's 3 more sessions, I believe. 2 more sessions after this. So you can sign up. It happens every month while the book is in its launch phases.
And it's free.
And
it's really a giving from Andy's heart. So
people have a hard time understanding that. They always think there's some back end thing. No, actually, it's free.
There's no pipeline.
There's no pipeline. It's just, if anything, Warnie would want me to think about, maybe you want to make a business out of this nonprofit you keep running. But yes, at this moment, it is all just free and the joy of life. Yeah.
So love you guys.
See you soon.
On a wonderful
chaos.
Bam.